A woman boards a flight in Denver on a Tuesday morning. She has a slight fever, a headache, and puts it down to a bad night's sleep. By the time she lands in Chicago, she has infected 41 people in the same pressurized cabin. 3 of them will board connecting flights within the hour to Atlanta, to Los Angeles, to London. She does not know she is carrying Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that once killed a third of Europe. Neither does anyone else. Not yet. What if the Black Death happened today? Not a metaphor, not a movie plot. The actual disease, the actual bacterium released into the actual world we live in right now, with airports and hospitals and antibiotics and social media, instead of horse carts and monasteries and prayer. The instinctive answer most people give is that it would be nothing. We have penicillin now. We have doctors, not priests burning incense in the streets. Case closed, right? The real answer is far more complicated and far more unsettling because the modern world gave us extraordinary defenses against this disease, and at the exact same time, it built entirely new ways for the disease to spread faster than it ever could in the 14th century. Let's start with the good news, because there genuinely is some. The Black Death of the 1300s was catastrophically deadly for one overwhelming reason. Nobody understood what was happening. They didn't know it was bacterial. They didn't know fleas and rats were the vector. They didn't know quarantine actually worked, though some cities stumbled onto it by accident and it saved lives without anyone fully understanding why. Doctors at the time treated the plague by lancing the buboes, bleeding patients, and burning aromatic herbs to purify the air, none of which did anything meaningful against a bacterial infection. Today, plague is not a mystery. It is Yersinia pestis, a bacterium, and it is treatable with antibiotics. Streptomycin, gentamicin, and several other options work extremely well, provided treatment begins early. In modern outbreaks, when cases are caught quickly and antibiotics are administered promptly, the death rate for bubonic plague, the most common form, the one you get from an infected flea bite, can drop to somewhere in the range of 10 to 15%. Down from a historical death rate that hovered around 60% or higher during the medieval outbreak. That is an enormous, genuinely life-saving improvement. So if that were the whole story, this would be a very short video. But it isn't. Because there's a second version of plague, and this is where things get genuinely frightening. Pneumonic plague. This is the form that occurs when the infection spreads to the lungs, either from an untreated bubonic case progressing internally, or from breathing in infectious droplets directly from another sick person's cough. Pneumonic plague spreads person to person through the air, the same basic transmission method as tuberculosis or the flu, and without treatment, it is almost universally fatal, with death often occurring within 24 to 36 hours of symptoms first appearing. 24 to 36 hours, not weeks, not days, sometimes barely more than a single day between feeling fine and being gone. This is the version of the disease that should genuinely concern us in a modern context, because think about what modern infrastructure actually does to something that spreads through the air and kills that fast. In the 14th century, the plague spread at the speed of a ship, or a horse, or a person's own 2 feet. It took the Black Death roughly 2 to 3 years to travel from its origins in Central Asia across trade routes into Europe and then spread through the entire continent. 2 to 3 years. Slow enough that some cities heard it was coming and had time, however limited, to prepare, to close gates, to attempt quarantines. Now picture our infected traveler. A single infectious person with early pneumonic symptoms, feeling only mildly unwell, boards a commercial flight. Within 18 hours, they could realistically be on 3 different continents. Within 72 hours, someone they infected on that first flight could have infected dozens more people in 3 additional countries, each of whom is now boarding their own flights to their own destinations. This is not a 2 to 3 year spread anymore. This is potentially a matter of days before the disease has a meaningful foothold on multiple continents simultaneously, invisible, because pneumonic plague can look in its earliest hours almost exactly like a bad case of the flu. Here's where the story genuinely diverges from the medieval version in a way that should unsettle you. In the 1300s, plague announced itself. The swollen, blackened lymph nodes, the buboes that gave bubonic plague its name, were visible, horrifying, and unmistakable. People saw it coming in their neighbors and fled. Pneumonic plague in its early stages announces nothing. Fever, cough, chest pain, difficulty breathing. It looks, for the crucial first several hours, exactly like the beginning of pneumonia or influenza or a bad chest cold. The very features that make modern pneumonic plague so lethal, its speed and its ordinary-looking early symptoms, are also precisely what would let it move through a modern population before public health systems even recognized what they were dealing with. Now let's talk about what would actually happen once it was recognized, because this is where the modern world's genuine strengths come into play, and they are considerable. Public health surveillance today is nothing like it was in the 14th century. Modern hospitals report unusual clusters of illness to health authorities within hours, sometimes automatically through electronic health record systems that flag anomalous patterns. Genomic sequencing, technology that did not exist even 20 years ago, can identify a specific pathogen within a day or two of a sample being collected, confirming exactly what the world is dealing with rather than centuries of doctors guessing at causes ranging from bad air to divine punishment to alignments of the planets. Once identified, the antibiotic response is fast, and it is not limited to treating the sick. Prophylactic antibiotics, meaning medication given to people who have been exposed but are not yet showing symptoms, can prevent infection from taking hold at all. Anyone who had close contact with a confirmed pneumonic plague patient today would likely be identified through contact tracing and offered a short preventive course of antibiotics within days, something with no equivalent whatsoever in the medieval world, where the only response to exposure was terror and, often, running away from your own family. Governments today also have tools that simply did not exist then. Modern quarantine and isolation protocols, developed and refined through outbreaks like SARS, Ebola, and COVID-19, mean health authorities have actual playbooks, actual legal authority, and actual logistical experience in rapidly isolating cases and tracing contacts across international borders using flight manifests and passenger data. The World Health Organization maintains coordination protocols specifically built to prevent exactly this kind of global spread from a single point source. So which version wins? The terrifying speed of modern travel, or the genuinely impressive modern capacity to detect and respond? The honest answer is that it would almost certainly depend entirely on the first 72 hours, and specifically on whether the first cases were correctly identified before they multiplied into an uncontrollable web of secondary infections spread across multiple countries. If plague were identified quickly within that critical window in a country with strong public health infrastructure, the outbreak could plausibly be contained to a cluster of a few hundred cases, treated aggressively with antibiotics, with a fatality count that, while genuinely tragic for the individuals and families involved, would be a tiny, almost unrecognizable fraction of the catastrophe that unfolded across medieval Europe. But if the first cases were misdiagnosed as ordinary pneumonia in a region with less developed healthcare infrastructure, or during a period when hospitals were already strained, which, as recent history has shown us, happens more easily than most people would like to believe, that critical 72-hour window could close before anyone realized what they were actually facing. And given how fast modern travel moves people and, unknowingly, pathogens across the entire planet, a delayed response could allow pneumonic plague to establish itself simultaneously in multiple countries before any single government had assembled a coordinated response. There's one more sobering wrinkle worth mentioning honestly because it deserves to be part of this picture rather than glossed over. Antibiotic resistance is a real and growing concern across modern medicine generally, and while widespread antibiotic-resistant strains of plague specifically are not currently a major global threat, isolated resistant strains have been documented before. In a hypothetical modern outbreak scenario, significant enough to warrant mass antibiotic distribution across affected populations, the pressure for resistant strains to emerge and spread would increase considerably, adding yet another layer of uncertainty to how such a scenario might ultimately unfold over weeks and months rather than just the initial critical days. So, what if the Black Death happened today? Not the calm reassurance of "we have antibiotics now, don't worry," and not the panicked assumption that global air travel would inevitably turn it into an unstoppable modern apocalypse. The honest answer sits directly between those two extremes. Humanity built genuinely extraordinary defenses since the 14th century, And humanity also built, almost as a side effect of that same progress, an infrastructure of speed and connection that could move this specific, ancient threat faster and further than it has ever traveled in all of recorded human history. The medieval world had centuries of warning as plague slowly crept across trade routes and still lost a third of an entire continent. The modern world would have, at best, a matter of hours or days to recognize what it was facing. And at that point, it would come down to the thing history keeps proving matters more than any single piece of technology: whether the people in charge in that first critical window chose to act with genuine urgency or chose to hesitate. The woman on that flight from Denver to Chicago will likely never know she carried anything at all. In one version of this story, she simply had a rough 48 hours. Took some medication a concerned doctor prescribed out of an abundance of caution, and felt fine again by the weekend. In another version, entirely dependent on decisions made by people she will never meet, in hospitals and health departments she will never visit. That same ordinary Tuesday morning flight becomes something else entirely.